This has been waiting for years. Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. Yes, this bowl blank has been waiting for me for years. This is a piece of hickory that came down during a hurricane. It's been once turned and it's been equalizing. It's never dry, remember that. And I'm going to twice turn this into, I think this is going to be a beautiful bowl. Look at that heartwood and look at all that grain pattern. This is going to be a beautiful piece. So I'm going to get it on a lathe and get started.
Okay, I'm going to use my large jam chuck here. You could call this a plate chuck. You can call it a variety of different things. I like to call it a jam chuck because essentially when I bring the tailstock up here, I'm jamming the bowl into place so that it's pinned into this position. You'll notice there's a negative space in that plate, and that's designed to accept a large expansion from the edge of the bowl. Sometimes the bowls will distort a lot where the pith will be protruding upward quite a bit. And that's what that negative space is on the chuck. First thing I'm going to do is true up the shoulder and the tenon and get those ready so that I can reverse this and put it into a 4-jaw chuck. Now remember, when you do a twice turn piece like this, the first rough turning of the bowl is perfectly round when it comes off the lathe. But after this has sat for a couple years and equalized, it is distorted. The sides will typically pull in. So this one hasn't distorted a ton. I'm using my spindle detail gouge here to cut the dovetail for the dovetail tenon and that will be seated into the 4-jaw chuck. Now I'm also going to shape the shoulder as the foot of the bowl, and I'd like to have that undercut as well. I'm using my larger 5/8 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge here to start roughing the outside of this bowl. You can see as it's turning, it's clearly not smooth. There are thicker and thinner areas, and that's what's making that wobble appearance. So I'm just working slowly and putting pressure down into the tool rest and letting the tool slice away material. And I continually have a thicker and thinner area that I'm going to be cutting through until I get that down to an even surface. I'm also going to use my spindle detail gouge to undercut what will become the foot of the bowl. I'm going to completely remove that tenon, and the shoulder will become the foot of the bowl. Now I'm doing a pull cut with my spindle detail gouge just because it's convenient to get down into that corner. And I know that I tell everybody not to use your spindle tools on side grain mounted bowls, and that's still the case. Here, this is a very, very, very light treatment. I'm not trying to bulk out a ton of material. If I were trying to use that spindle gouge when I'm roughing out a bowl, I would get in trouble. But doing small detail work like that is not a problem. So I'm going to return to my larger bowl gouge and start leveling off that surface of the exterior. I need to get down to where we've got an even cut all the way across, so we've removed the high spots essentially. And then I'm going to start using a shear scrape to blend these areas together. You can see that high spot there where I worked down the base of the foot there, or the base of the bowl rather, and that essentially is going to become a joint and connected piece here while I'm using the shear scrape. You can see the shavings coming off. They're very, very light shavings. You need to think of this as literally like shaving. We're just taking a very minute amount of material away just to fix and join different cuts. Now, I'm going to turn this around in just a moment and put this on the 4-jaw chuck. But the area that's going to be difficult for me to access is going to be the area down at the foot of the bowl. So I really want to take my time and make sure this area down here is looking particularly good. And I don't need to return to it when I've flipped this bowl around. So I'm using the shear scrape. The only thing that's engaging is the bottom wing. And you should be getting really fine shavings like that from this process. If you're getting dust, then you might not be doing this quite right. You just want to take your time here and lightly shave away using the shear scrape. Now, I've got a video all about the shear scrape. You're really going to want to check that out after this if you haven't already. Remember, take your time and work the exterior of the bowl and get it exactly the way you want it. Because the outside of the bowl is the bowl. The exterior of the bowl is the bowl. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, it's what we see, it's what we touch, it's what we're going to interact with the most. So take your time and get the shape exactly the way you want it. And that requires a lot of small, precise movements like you're seeing here. I'm taking my time and just removing a very small amount of material so that I've got this shape exactly the way I want it. You can see here how the bowl is wider and then it gets narrower. There I'm on level, but then I have this high spot still. That is the warping that occurred during the first turning or after the first turning. So I'm going to take this material down. I don't want to get up to the pads on the jam chuck, obviously. That would just cut into those. So you can see how the bottom portion right along the foot is the shape that I want. The top is not there yet, so we're going to deal with that now. I'm going to put my 4-jaw chuck on, and we're going to get this mounted in the chuck. The other nice thing about doing this, reversing this and working the exterior from this direction is it will be turning perfect in just a moment because it's mounted once and I won't unmount it until it's done. I'm going to take my time here and I'm going to do a trimming cut on the rim because the rim is also warped and distorted, so it's a little disorienting when you see all of that movement because you can see the inside is distorted, the rim is distorted, so it makes it look like the bowl's wobbling, but it's actually not wobbling, it's just the distortion of the bowl. Now I'm going to go from the rim down, and this is going to be a supported cut because I'm going to do a closed rim bowl, meaning the top rim is going to be narrower than the widest part of the bowl, which will be just a little bit lower. So you can see the direction I'm cutting, it's from right to left. Now I've got a video all about the supported grain cut direction and what direction you need to be cutting. If you've turned some bowls and you've had really, really good results and you didn't have to sand a lot, but then all of a sudden you turn another bowl and for some reason it's all super rough and you need to do a ton of sanding, but it still doesn't look right, well, there's a good chance you might not be cutting in the proper direction. You want to check out that video, and it's super valuable. The supported grain cut is something that you have to understand in order to have consistent, smooth cuts when you're making a side grain mounted bowl in particular. So here I'm using the shear scrape to just blend all those areas together. And think of it again like shaving. It's just a very, very light shave that's happening. Now you can see the curve of the bowl is really starting to take shape here. I've got some tool marks and some lines there I need to deal with, but all in all, it's coming together. See, all of the cuts are body movements as well. Is something you can see right here. I'm shifting my body. I'm not moving my hands or my arms. I'm keeping them close to my body and then shifting my weight. I'm kind of relaxing my knees and shifting from side to side and shifting my weight. That's also going to help contribute to very controlled curves and shapes that you make on your bowl. I've got a video all about that too. You might want to check that one out. So I'm going to come back to the front of this now that we've got the exterior all cleaned up. And I'm going to start shaping the rim and the inside of the bowl. And here you can see the distortion. There's our thin spot right there. And then the thick spot where the sides pull in. So we have to true that all up again. Just by turning this now, it's going to become a perfect circle again. And the fact that this wood is equalized dry, or drier than it was, it is equalized now, and it won't distort anymore. So it will stay perfectly round like this forever at this point. Now I want this rim to appear thick and beefy, but I'm going to undercut it as well. So I don't want the whole bowl, or the walls of the bowl rather, to be this thick all the way down inside there. It's going to be just too much. It'll be super heavy and bulky. But I can make the rim appear nice and wide and then cut underneath the rim and make the walls thinner. So the bowl overall is still sturdy, but it's going to be a lot lighter. The walls will be much thinner than you're seeing the width of that rim. I'm using my 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge, and I'm keeping the flute very open. Now, you need to be very cautious doing this because it's easy to get a catch. Only leave the flute open this wide when you're removing small amounts of material. The biggest thing I don't want to do when I'm making that move is to run into that thick material that's over to the right. So I'm going to take a little of this out of the way. Because what would happen is then the bowl gouge would become overloaded. It would be too much for it to do all at once, and that's when we get a catch. So I'm going to remove some of this material. And the other thing is to take your pace way down. Now I'm going to use my round nose scraper, and the two things I do with this is I pull a burr on it so that the burr is upward. So there's actually a small little cutting edge on the nose of this tool. The other thing you saw me do was raise the tool rest. Now I've got an article all about the round nose scraper that's really important for you guys to check out. Go over to my website, turnawoodbowl.com/round. And you can check out that article about how to use the round nose scraper properly. Two things I'm doing here is I'm raising the tool rest and I'm angling the tool to the left. So what happens with the round nose scraper is you don't want to engage the whole nose of that. It's too much, and it just becomes this very clunky scraper. And it's going to rip out in grain very quickly, and you don't want that. So what you can do is by pulling that burr, you've got a cutting edge on there. You lift it up at an angle, and you're essentially creating what you're seeing here with the bowl gouge. The round nose scraper just has one little area that's cutting, and it does a great job that way. Check out that article. It's really worth seeing. Okay, so with that undercut complete, I'm just going to keep working my way down inside this bowl. Remove material just gradually, small amounts. Again, I have the flute relatively open or facing upright. Now I'm going to go ahead and sharpen this up. I get this question a lot with the harder woods like this hickory. How do we cut them? And well, the answer is we just adapt. As wood turners, we have to adjust to harder woods, which means you've got to slow your pace down to let your tool cut properly, and you've got to resharpen periodically, and maybe more often than you normally would. And there's nothing wrong with that. That was as long as it took for me to sharpen that. So there's no reason for me not to go over there as soon as I feel the tool not responding properly or not cutting properly, it's time to sharpen. I'm going to use my thickness gauge here to determine how thick this is. And I can see right there, if you look on the right side, it's about a 1/2 inch thick, maybe a centimeter, just over a centimeter thick. And that's plenty thick. So I can take a little more material out. What I'm doing is I'm going back to where there is a previous section that I know. I'm going to switch out for my curved tool rest here so I can get a little extra support. But I move back to where I know the wall thickness is where I want it to be, and I just rub the bevel there to get the bevel on track, and then I slowly proceed forward and then just lightly let the cutting edge engage until I'm making a cut. Now at the bottom of each of those passes, there's more material and I need to cut more out of that bottom portion. So I'm essentially starting off where I'm cutting nothing. Then I'm cutting just a little sliver of material, and then that gradually increases. So right here you can see I'm rubbing and I'm cutting a little bit more material as I go down into that cut. And that's what you want to do. You want to basically just sneak up to the proper wall thickness. If you get too aggressive doing that, you can easily remove too much material, and then you have thinner spots down in your bowl, which nobody wants. And definitely nobody wants to go through the side of the or bottom of the bowl. That's not something we want to do here. So it's better to just gradually sneak up on that wall thickness. Okay, I have the sides down to the thickness that I'd like them to be, and now I've got to take the center portion out as well. I'll just take my time. Now again, this is a very hard wood, so I can't really rush this. I got to keep sharpening my tool and just cut at the pace that the wood will cut properly at. If I start pushing harder and trying to make my gouge go faster, it's going to start ripping material out, and that's where you really get into trouble. You can see that undercut rim now, how well it's holding all those shavings as well. I'm getting down to the last few passes here. Now this is my 1/2 inch 55 degree, and it's a finishing gouge, but the base of it's hitting the edge of the tool rest right there, so I need to switch out my tool rests. You can see there's just a little bit of a high spot in there, and right here is where I can't reach in anymore without the handle of my tool hitting the tool rest. And as soon as it does that, I lose the path and I lose a nice clean cut there. So it's hitting right there. So I have to stop and switch, and I'll use my J tool rest. It's always a good idea to have a couple different tool rests to accommodate different situations like this. So I'm rubbing, picking up the cut very light there. You can see those little corkscrew shavings coming off. Now I'm going to close the flute right at the center of the bowl so I don't get a kickback. And it makes a nice clean cut right across. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead and sand this up. Now I'll go through all of my grits. I start at 180, and then I'll go to 240, 300, and 400. And I'm going to apply tried and true original finish, and this is linseed oil and beeswax. I do not blend the linseed oil and beeswax, and I don't know what the proportions are of that. It's just the product that I purchased from Tried and True, and no, I'm not sponsored by them, although I probably should be at this point. But look at that. Wow, look at that heartwood. It is absolutely gorgeous. This hickory is so beautiful. The way this application goes is you apply a thin coat, and if you can see the finish on the wood, you have enough finish there. And then you let it sit an hour, and then you wipe off the surface so there's no excess or thick spots anywhere, and then you wait 24 hours. That is absolutely, the wood grain of this piece I am just so happy with. So then 24 hours later, you burnish the finish in with 4/0 steel wool. And the steel wool can be taken and you just basically pull it apart and you find a fresh section of the material of the steel wool like you can see there, and you just rub it while it's attached to the lathe and turning, and it burnishes out that finish and makes an absolutely beautiful luster finish on this bowl. And it is a food safe finish. I have never had any issues with particles from the steel wool sticking to the bowl or being on the bowl after the fact. I get that question a lot, but I have not seen that. And you can let this cure and then rinse it really well, so you won't, in case you think there might be some little particles of steel or in there, you can clean it up. But make sure you let the finish cure properly according to the instructions. And I believe this one is 72 hours for curing. Okay, so I'm going to take the foot off now, or actually I'm going to take the tenon off and create the foot of the bowl. These are push cuts going in towards the headstock. These are going to be the least problematic types of cut. If I were to go from the outside in towards the spindle there, I would be putting side pressure on there, and there's a chance I could dislodge this, and there's no need to do that. So I'm going to use push cuts in towards the headstock. It should keep the rotation perfectly smooth, and we shouldn't have any problems with that. Again, you're taking your time and just let the tool cut the material. I'm going to true up the foot here. Just clean that up just a touch. Trying to remove as little material as possible to make sure it's nice and flat right there. And then I'm going to dip down and curve out the inside bottom of this foot. This bowl is a really nice size. It can be used for so many different things. It could be a salad bowl. It could be fruits or vegetables or whatever you'd like to have in your kitchen. You could just leave it on a counter with nothing in it, and it looks gorgeous. It's beautiful to see, especially with the heartwood that's in the center of this. This bowl really has heart. So as I get down to this last bit of the nub, I'm making these cuts a lot lighter and going a little bit more gradual. You can see how little material I'm removing. It's just taking my time and getting the shape that I'm looking for. Don't want to rush this process. Okay, now I'm going to take this last nub, final part of the nub down and get this area all cleaned up. You can see how light these cuts are. The material coming off is so thin. Now I'm going to switch over to my spindle detail gouge so I can get down into that corner, and I'll sever this nub off. Now, if you're not comfortable doing this, you could stop here. You could cut that nub off, or you can actually just sand it all the way down. Use a more coarse sandpaper like an 80 grit and just sand it all the way down. Then once you get down to that surface, then change to a less coarse grit. But I like to use my spindle detail gouge here to get underneath in the bottom of that nub, and then I'll just sever it off. And remember, hickory is one of the harder woods here in North America. This is used to make baseball bats and broom handles and things like that. It's a very durable, very hard wood, so it's going to cut a lot slower than many other tree species. Okay, so I'm going to apply a forward pressure and turn the lathe off, and then after I've pushed the off button on the lathe, I will apply extra pressure forward, and that will allow the spindle detail gouge to go right through that pass and cut it off. And I just need to sand that bottom up and get that cleaned up nicely, and I will sign this and we'll finish it. I like using a wood burner and a chisel point to sign my name. This is funny. I was going to use the applicator to apply this finish here, and then I realized I have enough finish on my fingers that I can finish that with just what's on my fingers. Again, you don't need much at all. If you see the finish on the wood, you have enough. And there's the final piece. Look at that heart. Isn't it gorgeous? Absolutely beautiful. Ah. I love the look of this bowl, and the grain pattern is unbelievable.
Well, here's the final piece, and as I was hoping from the beginning this was going to look pretty good, and this did not disappoint. This piece of wood is absolutely gorgeous. With that heartwood moving through the center of this, it is just absolutely stunning. And there's some chatoyance here, which is created from the pressure of a limb above this particular piece of wood. So if you imagine this was growing in the trunk of the tree somewhere, and above it was a limb that was cantilevered, and it was creating weight that was applying pressure. And that's where we get this fiddleback, which you see right here. I don't know if you can see that or not. You see that little shimmer with those little wavy lines? It's called fiddleback because this is what instrument makers look for. They look for veneers of this particular type of wood to use on the backs of fiddles and guitars and things like that. So if you ever get around a fancy guitar, you might want to check the back and see if there's any fiddleback or chatoyance, and you can see some of this rippled effect in those uses. So it's actually a really, really cool piece. I'm very happy with this, and I could do this all day. I never get tired of doing this. One thing I wanted to mention to you guys was there's post-hole beetle holes in here. So post beetles are these, they get in there and they'll just drill these little holes, and somehow they're excreting something that leaves this little black stain. This was cut pretty quickly after the tree came down after a hurricane, and it was rough turned. But the post beetles still got in there. So this is another reminder that if you get freshly cut wood, you want to process it as fast as possible. You want to turn it either once, turn it all the way down to a bowl and just allow it to warp and distort a little bit as it dries, or twice turn it. And I've got videos all about twice turning. You can check those out. But the big takeaway is be sure that if you've got a beautiful piece of wood like this with this gorgeous heart in here, to get it on your lathe as fast as possible and start turning it. Don't let it sit around and don't let it dry, because that's not going to be good for it. You're going to have lots more critters other than just these post beetles in here. So keep that in mind. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you learned from this video. Leave a comment below this video. And while you're down there, click that like button. Thank you. Be sure you're subscribing if you aren't already, and click that bell. That way you're notified every time a new video comes out. Check out my website, turnawoodbowl.com. Over there, I've got everything you need to know about turning wood bowls, including online courses that will teach you exactly how to do everything you saw here in a very detailed manner, step by step, lesson by lesson, with videos and tons of information. So you want to check that out over at turnawoodbowl.com. All right, guys, as always, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, happy turning.